Hello, everyone. So, this week we get to do something that I love. We get to talk a little bit about history. So, part of understanding Spain and Spanish control, one of those is what was going on in Spain before 1492. So, that's kind of what we're going to look at to understand how Spain suddenly becomes like this dominant empire after 1492, after 1500, and how they really start to take shape and affect the Americas in a way that no one else was at the time. So, this is just a really brief little mini lecture. You can go and search on the stuff, and there are books written about this and there are videos. But again, just want to give you like a brief little timeline of what we're looking at so you can understand it a little bit better. So, before 1492, Spain was not unified. And I have like two maps there for you. So, the first one being showing you what Spain looks like around 1500. So, it had already started to unify in certain areas. So, before 1500, you even had some really kind of separate states along in here, but you'll notice these are like the big three that are really important to the time period that we're talking about. So you have Aragon, Castile, and then the Kingdom of Portugal over here on the side, right? And if you're like, I don't know where Spain is because I didn't have to do geography. So we're talking about this area of the world. So you can see this massive continent of Africa, Europe up here. We're starting to see what we in the United States refer to as the Middle East. Kind of this area opening up into Asia would be over here. But this is the area that we have zoomed in on in this map. So it was emerging from centuries of conflict. And I want to back up to around 700. So specifically 711. There's a lot of religious division and political consolidation going on. But there is an invasion in the year 711, and that is by Muslim forces. And so you'll notice Islam had really taken a hold of a lot of the known world at the time. So, like Africa, Europe, Asia, and had really started to spread very quickly. And at this point in the year 711, it has really gone into that part of Spain because Spain's like right there, not far from the African coastline. So keep that in mind. It had been, especially these southern parts, are still going to be under like Muslim rule until about 1470. So conditions helped to shape those Spain's political priorities, its economic needs, and religious worldview, and directly influenced its decision to explore beyond Europe. So, as we are looking at coming up close to the year 1492, we see a kingdom really in transition. So, for nearly 800 years, the Iberian Peninsula, which consists of modern day Spain and Portugal, had been ruled by those Muslim states, right? There was that conquest that I just mentioned in the year 711, and Christian kingdoms in the north, most notably Aragon and Castile, those slowly began expanding south in a long military and religious campaign known as the Reconquista. So you'll notice here, like this picture, keep in mind, this is after 1492. These are after like the Muslims and Jews also have been pushed out of Spain. So you'll notice like these are the two that they were talking about. And what's really cool, you can just go and Google this map if you want to, but it talks about Christian lands in the north when they were there, and then very slowly you can see like the Catholic Church, that Christian church is slowly moving southward and pushing Muslims and Jews out. So in 1492, the last Muslim kingdom of Granada, it fell to Christian forces. And here's just a little painting showing you like that last fall, that surrender. And that same year, the marriage alliance and joint rule of Ferdinand and Isabella. So Ferdinand is from Aragon, this area. Isabella is from Castile. And they completed the political unification of Spain. So what's really cool also about those two monarchs, they are the Christian monarchs. They are restoring the Catholic Christian church, right? But they rule, she never allows Ferdinand to really rule over her kingdom. And he never really allows her to rule over Aragon either. So, yes, they are joint. Yes, they are unified, but they also kind of rule separately, which is kind of neat. Like she kept her own rule over her people. But we do see them slowly unifying, and we do see them as a joint. Politically, they are aligned and joined together. So by the late 15th century, the late 1400s, we have a centralized monarchy, so a king and queen ruling over both, a strong Catholic identity, so that strong Christian church, and a large experienced military and a noble class shaped by centuries of warfare, right? We know at least since the year 700 they've been fighting. So, however, the end of the Reconquista, it also created a challenge. You now have all these professional soldiers, and you have these nobles and resources that have just been in a constant state of war. We don't know how to live outside of warfare. So there's no internal war to sustain that anymore. So what do we do with this huge professional soldier class? What do we do with all these nobles? Like, where do we go next? And that's going to lead to, let's explore. Let's see what else is out there. Let's grow our empire, right? And that's exactly what they're going to do. So let's see, there we go. So there are some economic pressures and new opportunities. So Spain really lagged behind those other European powers, especially their next door neighbor, Portugal, and Italian city-states in overseas trade. So luxury goods such as spices, silk, and precious metals, those were costly and largely controlled by Muslim and Italian middlemen. So if you'll notice here, I have all these different like trade routes that were established really throughout Europe. You can see this is the like beginning of Turkey and the Ottoman Empire, and this is where you do all these overland and sea routes. But then when you get into like Asia, you have to pay all these people along the way. So you've got to pay the Venetians, you've got to pay the Genoese, you've got to pay all these different people, and there's so many middlemen that you have to have like vast amounts of money in order to pay all these people, and you've got to cross the whole Ottoman Empire as well. That costs a lot of money to do that. The Portuguese at this time, they had already began looking for routes, not through the Mediterranean anymore. They were seeing, is there a way that we can go around Africa and cut through? And so Spain is going to join on with that as well. And this exploration offered Spain several economic advantages: direct access to wealth without relying on all these traditional trade routes. Like, we're trying to cut the middleman out so we don't have to pay them off. The potential discovery of gold and silver to strengthen their power. And then also new lands to reward those nobles and soldiers and to help reduce that internal tension that was going on. And also, Spanish rulers believed overseas expansion could rapidly elevate Spain's economic standing in Europe. Like, why wouldn't it, right? And there's also not only economic motivations, but there's also religious motivation, the spreading of Catholicism, right? So religion plays a very central role in Spain's identity. Think about how much influence the Catholic Church has on like the Southwest United States and Mexico, and then our neighbors to the south. The Catholic Church is very powerful and very strong in those areas, right? And the Catholic just faith itself. And so what you're going to see is that central role following the Reconquista, because we're trying to expel the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain and to restore this one unifying religion of Catholicism. So after centuries of conflict with Muslim leaders, Spanish leaders viewed themselves as defenders and promoters of Catholic Christianity. And so exploration, not only does it promise to hopefully will gain riches, but also the conversion of non-Christian peoples, the expansion of the Catholic influence beyond Europe, and then a continuation of religious struggle in a new global context. So this religious mindset, it really framed exploration not only as economic expansion, but also as like this sacred mission from God that was also supported by the crown. So a lot of times when we talk about Spanish conquistadors and Spanish exploration, we talk about the 3 G's. And the 3 G's are, it's supposed to be in this order: God, glory, and gold. But usually it's gold, glory, God, right? And we're going to talk about why we kind of joke around and say God was always last in the 3 G's. But that's a lesson for like the Black legend. So we'll talk about that in the next lesson. So, this competition in the Atlantic world, Portugal had already begun. Like I said, they had Henry the Navigator, and he was a son. Well, Prince Henry the Navigator. He was the son of the king, obviously, and he is looking for water routes, and he's like trying to find that quick way so that we don't have to go all the way around Africa. Is there like a river that cuts through the African continent? How big is the African continent? So they had already started looking that way, began exploring the African coast, and they had gained access to gold trade routes and even enslaved labor by coming in contact with those West African civilizations and areas. Spanish leaders feared being excluded from those opportunities. And so the Atlantic, what it would offer Spain is a chance to compete directly with Portugal, new westward maritime routes, and an opportunity to bypass those established European and Mediterranean powers like the Italians, right? That they were trying to cut those people out anyways. So supporting such expeditions like the ones that you've probably all heard about, like Christopher Columbus, he, proposed this westward voyage involved significant risk, but the potential rewards was wealth, prestige, and power, and those were enormous. So when we are talking about Christopher Columbus, there's for some reason, like my generation, we were taught that, oh, they thought the world was flat in the 1400s. No, they didn't. They knew it was round. What Christopher Columbus, his mistake was he didn't realize how big the earth is. So he miscalculated thinking, oh, we'll just go like the back way, right? Across the Atlantic and we'll go into Asia that way. He thought it was a lot of a shorter distance that way because no one had ever done it. No one had ever measured it before. And so that's why when he got to the Indies, the West Indies, and called it that, it's because he thought he had landed on these islands that Marco Polo had talked about in his journals. So he felt like he was just off the coast of like Asia at the time. He really wasn't. He had stumbled upon this land that no other Europeans had seen since like the Vikings, but that's a whole different thing. So, and you'll notice here what I've done is you can see like some of the trade routes going here, and then of course Magellan's when he circumnavigated the world, or his crew did. But really, a lot of like the French, the English, and of course the Spanish do a lot of this exploration across the Atlantic Ocean. The Spanish are going to do it first, and that's why their wealth grows so quickly because no one has tapped into the natural resources here in Europe yet. As you know, there are millions of people already living in the Americas, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So why Spain explored? So these are the main reasons. Spain began exploring overseas because it was newly unified, politically ambitious, seeking wealth and access to global trade. So economics played into this, motivated by strong religious zeal, so that religious motivation, and determined to compete with rival European powers. They wanted their empire and their kingdom to grow. So the year 1492 really marked both the end of medieval religious conflict, like the Crusades, in Iberia, and the beginning of Spain's rise as a global empire, setting the stage for dramatic changes in world history. And for the first time, we're really going to see that connection of the world being like globally connected, and hearing about the history of that global within a global context beginning in 1492.